Galilee, I understand that is seen, at least by scholars today, as being a hotbed of radicalism. How true is that? To what extent is that true?
That's a good question. I don't think any of us can say definitively. As far as biblical evidence goes, there are two bits of data that we have that are significant. One of them is in Luke chapter 13. There's a reference to Pilate sprinkling the the blood of the Galileans with their sacrifice. Now, no one knows exactly what this is referring to. I mean, it's a very obscure reference, and so it's possible that it's referring to some Galileans who have come to Jerusalem who are perceived by Pilate to be insurrectionists. Okay. So, therefore, that it might well be that they were killed by Pilate, and when they were going to perform sacrifice. The other is that in Acts chapter 5, the great teacher Gamaliel gives a very important speech in which he basically says, "Look, let's tolerate the Christians because if this new movement is of God, there's nothing we can do that will prevent its expansion. But if it's not of God, it will pass away, and we don't have to worry about it. It'll sort of die on its own, impotence." And the example he uses is of Judas the Galilean, who seems to have been a messianic figure who led a rebellion from Galilee in the year in AD 6. And, nothing came of that movement. Um, so once again, so you have two instances of Galileans who seem to be associated with violence. But, one of the reasons people bring this up is because there is a certain move in among scholars to raise the question of whether or not Jesus was a radical messianic figure. And part of the argument they use is that crucifixion was a policy which was not for every criminal, but largely confined to those criminals who would be threatening the peace of the empire, usually by sort of, either by being brigands or by people who would stir up rebellion. And so if crucifixion is largely confined to that sort of people, then presumably Jesus was being crucified by the Romans because he was perceived to be a threat to the empire, rather than just. I mean, we tend to think of Jesus simply as a teacher of spiritual truths, but this particular view says, well, if that's all he was, he wouldn't have been a threat to the Romans, and they wouldn't have crucified him. Of course, the alternative, I mean, that interpretation, though, goes well beyond what the Christian scriptures actually say. So if you can say that Galilee is sort of a hotbed of sedition, then it's easy to say, Jesus coming out of Galilee was another one of these, messianic figures who was trying to stir things up. And look, he got to Jerusalem and trying to declare himself to be the Messiah, the King of the Jews, and it backfired, and the Romans put him to death.
But it is
Rather,
still true, though. It is still true, though, Dr. Smith, that Jesus was, if not a disciple of John the Baptist, at least John the Baptist taught him to some extent. Uh, uh, and John the Baptist was seen to be very radical. Uh, wouldn't you reason that Jesus would have adopted some of John's teachings?
good. The question about the relationship between Jesus and John is an interesting one. Of We're not told that John was Jesus' teacher. What we're told is that John clearly sees himself as the one spoken of in Isaiah, the voice in Isaiah 40, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord." And so John the Baptist, who was a relative of Jesus, I mean, if you take Luke's gospel seriously, John's mother is Elizabeth, who is a kinswoman to Mary, and to whom Mary goes at the time when she is pregnant with Jesus. But the point then becomes that John is preparing Israel for the coming of the Messiah because he believes that the Messiah is going to come and bring judgment upon the earth. And and therefore the way you prepare for judgment is by repentance. And that baptism is a sign of that repentance. Now, the interesting thing is, say, in Luke's gospel, that we are told that, all sorts of people came to John. Not only, the Pharisees, but even soldiers came. And when they asked the question, so what must we do, to avoid the judgment? One of the answers is, well, if you're a soldier, be content with your wages and don't use your power as a soldier to bully people. So John's message is not radical in the sense that he was advocating any sort of overthrow of Rome. Where he becomes a problem is that, he ends up losing his head, not because Herod disliked him. On the contrary, Herod was attracted to John the Baptist, but Herod was married to his brother's wife, and John the Baptist called him on it and spoke out, and that was what earned the ire of Herod's wife, and she's then manipulates Herod to have John executed.